I didn't disappear all at once. I faded. So slowly that even I didn't notice it happening. There was no breakdown, no dramatic goodbye, no moment where I decided to stop being myself. I kept showing up. Kept answering messages. Kept doing what was expected. From the outside, my life looked intact. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being present inside it. I learned early how to adapt. How to be agreeable. How to read the room and adjust myself until I fit comfortably into whatever space I was in. At first, that felt like maturity. Emotional intelligence. Survival, even. People liked me for it. I was easy to be around. Low maintenance. Understanding. I didn't cause problems. I didn't demand much. I learned how to soften my opinions, delay my needs, and quiet my reactions. I told myself I was being flexible. What I was really doing was disappearing in pieces. Every time I felt something too strongly, I pushed it down. Every time I wanted something that didn't make sense, I talked myself out of it. Every time my inner voice said this isn't right, I answered with it's not that bad. That sentence became my favorite lie. It's not that bad. It's not bad to stay a little longer. It's not bad to compromise again. It's not bad to let this go. Nothing was bad enough to justify leaving, changing, or choosing myself. So I stayed. I stayed in conversations where I felt invisible. I stayed in routines that drained me. I stayed in versions of myself that felt smaller every year. And because I never collapsed, no one noticed anything was wrong. That's the danger. People only worry when you fall apart. If you function quietly, they assume you're fine. I assumed it too, at least consciously. But there were moments. Small ones. Easy to ignore. Times when I caught my reflection and felt strangely disconnected from it. Times when someone asked what I wanted and my mind went completely blank. Not confused. Empty. I realized I talked about my life as if it belonged to someone else. I described it logically, efficiently, like a report. I rarely spoke about how it felt, because I didn't know anymore. Feeling had become optional. Useful people don't need to feel. Adaptable people don't need to choose. They just adjust. I thought I was avoiding conflict. What I was avoiding was myself. The scariest part wasn't unhappiness. It was neutrality. Days passed without emotional texture. Weeks blended together. Nothing was wrong, and nothing was right. I wasn't suffering, I was absent. And absence is easy to maintain. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to justify it. You don't even have to admit it. You just keep going. I told myself this was adulthood. That everyone feels this way eventually. That meaning comes later, after stability, after responsibility, after enough patience. I kept waiting for the moment when I would feel like myself again. That moment never came. Because I wasn't lost. I was slowly erasing myself to keep the peace. And the worst part? No one asked me to. The moment I realized I was disappearing didn't arrive with clarity. It arrived with confusion. I started feeling strangely tired after conversations that were supposed to be easy. Not physically, emotionally. As if every interaction required me to perform a version of myself that no longer fit. I smiled at the right moments, said the expected things, reacted appropriately. And then I went home and felt hollow. I couldn't understand why. Nothing bad had happened. No one had hurt me. No crisis, no betrayal, no obvious reason to feel lost. That made it harder to admit something was wrong. When pain has no clear cause, you start doubting your right to feel it at all. I told myself I was overthinking. But the feeling stayed. I began noticing how often I edited myself in real time. How quickly I swallowed opinions before they reached my mouth. How instinctively I adjusted my tone, my words, my desires, not because anyone demanded it, but because I had learned that being agreeable kept things smooth. Comfortable. Predictable. I had become very good at making life easy for others. And very bad at making it honest for myself. The cracks showed up in unexpected ways. I would be asked simple questions. What do you want to do? What matters to you right now? And my mind would freeze. Not because I didn't care, but because I had trained myself not to answer. Wanting had become dangerous. Wanting meant conflict. Wanting meant disappointment. Wanting meant risk. So I stopped wanting consciously, and over time, unconsciously too. That scared me more than sadness ever could have. Sadness means something is missing. Emptiness means you've stopped looking. I realized I had built a life where nothing asked me to show up fully. Everything was manageable because I had lowered my emotional volume so much that nothing could hurt me deeply. Nothing could move me either. The moral dilemma crept in quietly. Do you continue living this way, emotionally muted, adaptable, safe, knowing that you won't collapse, but also knowing that you'll never feel fully alive? Or do you risk disrupting everything by reclaiming parts of yourself you've kept quiet for so long that you're not even sure they still exist? Staying felt reasonable. Leaving felt reckless. I told myself that many people live like this. That stability matters more than intensity. That peace is better than chaos. I repeated those ideas until they sounded like wisdom instead of fear. But late at night, when there was no one to perform for, the truth was louder. I didn't feel peaceful. I felt erased. I started remembering moments from earlier in my life, not dramatic memories, but small ones. Times when I spoke without rehearsing. When I laughed without calculating. When I wanted something and didn't immediately talk myself out of it. That version of me felt distant. Not gone. Just buried. I realized something painful then: I hadn't lost myself accidentally. I had traded myself away, slowly, in exchange for approval, stability, and the illusion of harmony. No one forced that trade. I agreed to it every time I chose silence over honesty. Every time I chose comfort over truth. Every time I told myself it's easier this way. Easier, yes. But emptier. The hardest part was admitting that my life worked. That's what kept me stuck. When your life functions, leaving feels unjustified. You tell yourself you should be grateful. That wanting more is selfish. That discomfort is just immaturity you need to outgrow. So I stayed longer than I should have. I stayed until I barely recognized myself. Until I realized that disappearing quietly doesn't feel like dying. It feels like becoming invisible while still breathing. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. The moment I decided to stop disappearing didn't feel brave. It felt irresponsible. That's the word that came to mind first. Irresponsible to disturb a life that technically worked. Irresponsible to question arrangements that caused no obvious harm. Irresponsible to want something more when nothing was visibly wrong. That belief almost kept me invisible forever. Because disappearing is rewarded when it's quiet. No one argues with you. No one resists you. No one accuses you of being difficult. You become easy. Predictable. Safe. And in that safety, you slowly lose the ability to tell whether you're choosing peace, or avoiding truth. I didn't wake up one day knowing what I wanted. I only knew what I couldn't keep doing. I couldn't keep softening myself until there was nothing left to soften. I couldn't keep explaining away the dull ache that followed me everywhere. I couldn't keep calling absence, maturity, and silence strength. So I started small. Not with a dramatic exit. Not with confrontation. Not with declarations of independence. I started by noticing. Noticing when I agreed automatically. Noticing when I laughed to keep things smooth. Noticing when my body tensed before I spoke, and then relaxed when I chose silence instead. That awareness hurt. Because once you see how often you erase yourself, you can't pretend it's accidental anymore. The first time I didn't adjust myself for someone else felt wrong. My voice sounded unfamiliar to my own ears. My words felt too direct, too unpolished, too honest. I expected rejection. What I got was discomfort. Not from them. From me. I had lived so long inside a carefully edited version of myself that authenticity felt like a violation of the rules. I felt exposed, almost rude, even when I hadn't said anything unkind. That's when I understood how deeply I had internalized the belief that my real self was inconvenient. Some people noticed the change. A few pulled away. A few seemed confused. A few subtly pushed back, as if trying to restore the version of me they were used to. That hurt more than I expected. Because it revealed something painful. Some connections survive only when you stay small. Some relationships depend on your disappearance to function. Letting those shift, or fade, felt like loss. But staying would have been a deeper one. As I took up more space, the emptiness I had been avoiding surfaced fully. Without constant adjustment to distract me, I had to face the years I had spent muted. The choices I hadn't made. The desires I had dismissed before they could take shape. Grief came then. Not dramatic grief. Quiet grief. Grief for the self I had slowly abandoned. For the conversations I never had. For the boundaries I never set. For the moments when I could have chosen differently and didn't, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't believe I was allowed to. I didn't try to turn that grief into motivation. I let it exist. Because grief, unlike numbness, proves that something still matters. Reclaiming myself didn't suddenly make life easier. It made it sharper. I felt things more intensely: discomfort, doubt, desire, fear. I had to learn how to tolerate being misunderstood. How to let silence sit when I didn't rush to fill it. How to accept that being real costs more than being agreeable. But it also gave me something I hadn't felt in years. Presence. My days stopped blurring together. I could remember them, not because they were exciting, but because I was actually inside them. My reactions felt mine. My thoughts didn't need immediate correction. My choices, even the uncertain ones, carried weight. I wasn't invisible anymore. And that was terrifying. But it was also alive. If you're listening to this and you feel strangely untouched by your own life, not unhappy, not content, just distant, I want you to hear this clearly: you don't disappear because you're weak. You disappear because you learned that taking up space wasn't safe. And you don't come back all at once. You return in fragments. In the moments you don't soften your truth. In the pauses where you don't explain yourself. In the decisions you make without waiting for permission. I didn't rebuild my life overnight. I simply stopped erasing myself to keep it comfortable. No one applauded. No one announced the change. But something fundamental shifted. I became visible to myself again. And that, quietly, changed everything. I didn't disappear because I wanted to. I disappeared because it felt easier than being real. Now, even when it's uncomfortable, even when I'm unsure, even when it costs me, I choose to exist. Fully. Because being present in your own life is not selfish. It's the minimum requirement for it to be yours.